All right, welcome to another episode of the McFuture podcast. Let's jump right in. So, live events are back. Where I live, there are now outdoor events at a racetrack, I guess, or some sort of outdoor venue that's nearby. They're selling not individual tickets, but they're selling tables of 4 to 6 people. So now you have to commit to buying 4 tickets at least, maybe 6. And then on top of that, you're now an event planner. Like, you now have to keep track of who's going to go, who's not going to go. You need to find friends who have the same interests as you. You know, it's hard enough to find a partner. Now you have to find another couple, or you have to go find homeless people to sit at your table. I don't know what it is, but that's how they're selling them, I guess, so they could distance appropriately and make enough money. Of course, Ticketmaster, they also add a 34% fee on top of that. $60 in fees on $174 in tickets. There's still money to be made in in-person events. And there's one thing for sure. It's great to be a monopoly. In fact, I have to check their stock to see if it's worth investing in, because it might be. I wonder if I could make enough off the stock to make back all the service fees I pay. I don't know. I'd have to do the math. And if someone out there does it, please let me know. I watched Elon Musk Neuralink video. And in case you don't know what a Neuralink is, it's basically bullshit. I mean, it's a great forward-thinking, futuristic technology where they drill a hole in your skull and implant this device which transmits information to your phone and your phone back to it. It's supposed to read your brain waves. It's supposed to help people who have certain brain disorders and disabilities. And at some point, it should help people who are disabled or paralyzed send brain waves to the rest of the body wherever the paralysis happens. So listen, clearly I'm not the right person to explain the medical science here, but they did this on a pig. So they had actually several pigs that they drilled the holes in, and they had one pig that they took it out of and 2 others that they showed they could read the brain waves from the pigs. What a horrible waste of pigs. I mean, I'd rather have bacon than some disfigured pig. And they showed this machine that's used to do this drilling that I can't imagine anyone signing up to do this. But then again, there are people signing up to go to Mars, so you never know. There's a lot of people with no purpose in their lives and who would otherwise walk in front of a bus, and they're like, okay, well, you know what? Maybe you should drill something into my head. And maybe we should as a society, just because what is the alternate use for a person who feels there's no purpose for them? What we see is this inkling of a future where biology and technology start to meld, and people call it cyborg or whatever. But once they do, it opens a whole new universe. In fact, that's the unification point between biological and physiological malware and viruses and diseases. So what was once something that could infect only computers can now jump into the computer that is your brain and into our biology. So we're opening the door to hacking. And if AI ever becomes self-aware, or something that sci-fi movies have predicted, it will wipe us out because once you let in this kind of technology into our biology, you're opening yourself up to the same kind of hacking that exists, on bank computers or whatever technology that we use. The other thing that was funny is this thing uses Bluetooth. So the other day I was trimming my sideburns and I have this electric razor, but I was also wearing my Bluetooth headset. And whenever the razor got close to the sideburn, the Bluetooth would cut out. So now this is in your brain. So your brain is now relying on a technology that can't keep a Bluetooth headset connected. So we're going to see people who, I'm cured. I used to be a paraplegic. I can walk. And then they walk by some electrical outlet and then they just collapse. I mean, it is kind of insane that we have to rely on these rudimentary technologies. And it's shorthand to say we're not there yet. The technology needed to make make this viable, especially for people who are paraplegic or quadriplegic, is going to need to evolve. And I'm not sure that Neuralink will be around for that, because that's really the problem with long-term investments in business environments. This is why startups are only good at commercializing technologies that already exist. They're not good at long-term research because no one's going to finance it. No one's going to invest in a startup where the payback is 10 years from now. And that's where governments should come in. But our government has been remiss in doing that for decades now, and to our detriment. So I think funding these technologies is not, we can't expect it from the private sector. Although, to be fair, SpaceX did do that successfully, but they also had a lot of funding from NASA and government. So it can be done through these private-public partnerships. It is something that shows promise, but also kind of reveals a certain dark side to our future. And the most impressive thing about it is when they went to the Q&A in this presentation, which was really meant to be a recruiting video more than anything, and Elon basically said that, was the caliber of the people involved. They went around with different questions that people submitted, and each person answered it, and they were really bright, really smart people. So that was very impressive. You know, if nothing else, even if it's a boondoggle and it'll never happen, I think as a work environment, it looked pretty cool. It made me a little nostalgic of my days working with tech nerds and geeks, because I'm kind of a tech nerd and geek. And there's no politics or double talk or irrationality. It's basically, you know, the best idea or the best solution that wins. And in normal corporate environments, that's not the case. There are power games. There's, you know, people who don't want to give up budgets. There's historical, you know, preferences between one group and the other. There's all kinds of things that pollute the purity of having the right solution or the right answer. So the more you drift towards esoteric products like fashion, or services like media, or hustles like politics, the more opinion starts to float in, the more, you know, politics start to enter in, because there is no right answer. There's just opinions. And personally, I'm saving my Neuralink implant for old age. So if I'm ever going to try it, I'm saving everything for when I'm 80. So the list so far includes psychedelics, skydiving, pimping, vigilantism. You know, I want to shoot bad guys, but you know, if I go to jail and life sentence isn't so bad if you're 80. Owning a pit bull, base jumping, you know, like in those wingsuits where you jump off the cliff. And gangster rapping, I want to do that. I want to have beef with whoever the young punk gangster rapper is at the time. But of course, you know, the new gangster rappers are so soft and nice that there is no gangster anymore. Now, the next guy's going to be, yo, I'm in vegan. And I'm going to be like, yo, I'm a meat eater, you know, and that's what, you know, we're going to have a rap battle over that. By the way, my final raps are going to be much better. I'm going to practice a lot when I'm 79. And fathering a litter of kids that I can identify in the Maury Povich show. Like, these are all things I'm saving along with Neuralink for my 80s. So hopefully this show continues through then, and you guys will be able to tune in and see me rapping and talking to Maury and identifying a litter of kids that may or may not be mine. A lot to look forward to. Does Elon Musk ever sleep? So he's got Tesla, SpaceX, Solar City, Neuralink, the Boring Company that's making tunnels underground. You know, it makes me think that he's like a Cylon that dies every couple of days and then just gets regenerated on a nearby spaceship and then just reappears and just keeps working. It's really amazing what he does, but also I can't imagine it's a happy life, because, and maybe it is, you know, maybe it's a satisfying life, but he's certainly not getting the rest and relaxation that the typical person gets. And look, you know, a lot of the stuff that he does aren't new inventions. These are things that have been thought about by others. But the fact that he got, you know, spaceships into the sky and he changed the auto industry almost single-handedly, you can't write him off, is what I'm saying. I started to think about how bad we are at self-assessment and self-awareness especially when it comes to our blind spots. And we all have them. There are things that we're just not wired for. Some people aren't wired for technology. Some people are more mathematically minded. Others are more literary. And some are detail oriented, and some are, big picture. And to be successful in life, it's very important to augment the thing that you're great at with your weakness and finding someone who complements that weakness, or multiple people who do. And it's very hard. I know for me that, I'm kind of a big picture person, but I also force myself to do a lot of detail stuff like this. Like setting up these videos is torture for me because, you have to make sure every little thing, every little box is ticked. And it's, it's a muscle that you can learn to develop, or you could augment with others, which I'm hopeful to do soon. But you look at professions like economics, for example. The reason I think economics is struggling as a profession, and maybe economists won't agree with it, but I don't care. They don't have a good grasp of technology or culture trends, because economics is inseparable from culture. There's a professor of economics who won a Nobel Prize, I think it was last year. Richard Thaler is his name. He showed that a lot of the things economists expect people to do that are rational, they don't do, because of any number of reasons. And so he did a bunch of different experiments, and he talked about all these situations where people just don't observe what is in economic theory. And economics is very much a social science. I know it has some numbers and some other things that make it look, more sciencey, like hard science, like physics or biology. But the reality is, it's not. And it's very much tied to culture more than anything else. So what might be a behavior that you observe here in the US is not going to be the behavior you observe some other country, or even in a different period in time. You fast forward to the future or to the past, people were different. They won't react the same way. And those things shift. Kovid, for example, is a big shift in how people think, and that will have a cascading effect through their behaviors. The same thing happened after 9/11. How people think was affected. In fact, they were, for the first time, even acknowledging the existence of the Middle East and what goes on there, for better or worse, but at least it now existed in our consciousness in a way that it didn't before. Also, technologists are people who tend to think rationally in ways that people do not. And there are a bunch of doers, like people who make great product. And, I fall into this category myself, where I think I make really good, compelling content. I make really good things, but I'm very bad at publicizing them. And I don't have the ego for it. And it's funny because when you put stuff out there, you would think that ego is one of the reasons you want some sort of acknowledgement and adulation. I think that's part of it, but for me, a very small part. I think for me, it's always been about expressing creativity more than anything else. And for a lot of people who are creatives and creators, it's very hard to put themselves into marketing mode. And so they need to almost force themselves to dedicate a percentage of their time to putting their work out there, not just creating more work. And I think there is something to be said for lots of quality work eventually being recognized, but there's also something to be said for going the way of Van Gogh, slicing your ear off and killing yourself. So, great creators can go any number of ways. So I think marketing can be salvation for a lot of great creators. And quite frankly, it's been salvation for a lot of mediocre creators, because a lot of times the people who just kept putting stuff out and kept marketing themselves did better than a lot of people that I know have more talent, but maybe just gave up because they never seemed to get the traction. And the other kinds of people that have blind spots, the world is filled up with them, which is people who have low information or no information about a lot of topics, still giving their opinions on those topics. And I see it all the time. I mean, we arguably have a president and a bunch of Congress people who do that regularly. So that's the reality where, the misinformed, the blind are leading the blind. And it's an unfortunate state of circumstances. And you can never be fully informed on every single issue. Sometimes you need to act with limited information. But there is attainable knowledge out there that people just aren't attaining. So prediction. I think most people's social media following is going to shrink on a lot of these mature platforms like Twitter and Facebook and even Instagram. Because of a few trends that I'm seeing. One, of course, is COVID and remote work. It limits your contact with new people. So your acquisition channel of meeting new people is now confined because people are now in their own little friend circles. They work with the people they worked with before through Zoom and Skype. Now, that could change, but I also think as long as this COVID cloud is hanging over us, people aren't going to have that same level of accumulation and openness that they had before. Another thing is polarization and tribalism. It's made us completely intolerant of ideas that differ from ours or the ones we chose to buy off the shelf. And that increases the unfriending. I know people for whom politics is their whole identity now. And if someone diverges with them in that opinion, I don't care. I have people who are, hardcore leftists and, Democrats, Republicans and, Trumpers, whatever it is. I personally don't care because as long as I know the person, they're a decent person, I really don't care how they vote. But that's really not the norm. So I see a lot of people unfriending people just because of that. And then there's the attrition from social networks to more private channels of communication, either small networks or small groups on WhatsApp and these other platforms. I think, Facebook still benefits because if that transition happens and they own WhatsApp, they still can monetize it. But I think there's a general distrust of large groups, and also the cancel culture scares a lot of people, and people are being scared off from putting things out there that could eventually come back and bite them in the ass. So at some point they're like, why should I do this? So anyway, I think it'll shrink, and I think the likelihood is very high. I follow Dana White. I don't know if you know him, but he's the Ultimate Fighting Championship owner, the guy who runs the league. And he posts all the pre-fight stuff and some fight highlights. And I'm like, man, this is refreshing. It's good to know that sometimes Americans pummel each other for money. There's something to be said for a bloody battle that's sort of controlled and voluntary and for a good cause, money, as opposed to a crazy cause because some guy, wants to go out and protect a car dealership with a rifle. If you've moved on to ebooks and audiobooks and podcasts, whatever you have on your bookshelf is a time machine. It's like your fashion or your facial hair. It's frozen in time to whenever it was that you were your best self, which was pre-2010. Okay, just take my word for it. Whenever it was before 2010. And the shelf might also have some promotional books that you got for free and you just didn't have the heart to throw out. And quite honestly, that makes you a hero. You're a hero if you take a book that you'll never read and have the decency to put it on your shelf and not throw it in the trash. Because look, someone went through the trouble of writing it and printing it and, proofreading and all that stuff. But, it's amazing how quickly we've transitioned. And yet when you watch all of these Zoom interviews and all the stuff that, because now everyone's working from home, they all strategically position themselves in front of all these books that they've supposedly read. But I guarantee you that bookshelf is a zombie land of things that are old or have never been read. So, I figured why go through the pretense? Put a painting out there, put a chalkboard, and I'm good to go. David Graeber, who wrote, I think he was the one who wrote the book Bullshit Jobs, which, by the way, I've also written about before him. I want credit. Give me credit. I want credit. Anyway, so he tweeted that all the publishers that he knows blame Jeff Bezos and Amazon for the destruction of the book industry. And I'm like, really? Okay, let's dig into this. This is a very common and misguided claim. Publishers, first of all, are not the most reliable sources to gauge the cause of their own decline. And someone who has had a book published by a major publisher and has dealt with a bunch of different publishers on the way to doing that and has been doing it again for reasons that I'll explain some other time, it's much more complicated than just blaming Amazon. So let's jump in. First, nobody reads, okay? I found a whole bunch of stats that I'm not going to get into, but leisure time reading has plummeted. The number of people who read books, especially recreationally, has plummeted across all age groups. So, and lately they've lost ground to other types of consumption. You know, whether it's podcasts or audiobooks or whatever else, or they just sit around watching TV because they don't have to read books. And, there's a lot of people that are elitist and say, oh, you should read books. Books are important. Maybe, maybe not. There are other ways to consume information and be informed. And what that did was make publishing a shrinking industry. And what happens to shrinking industries is they have consolidation. And they shed a lot of jobs, a lot of companies go out of business, other competitors go in and they take share, they hire some of the best people. And so you're left with this shrunken shell of a former industry. And secondly, publishers were already antiquated. They're stuck in processes and some sort of legendary, status that they don't have anymore. They have a lore of greatness that they have helped bring to the forefront, great writers. But that lore is now crippling them. It is now an obstruction, and it is leading to their destruction, has led to a lot of their destruction. If I told you about some of the insane conversations I had, I'll tell you about one. There was a woman that I was introduced to who is I guess she was a VP at some big publisher at the time. And I got on the phone with her and I guess, went through a bunch of, secretaries, receptionists, whatever the correct name is, assistants. I don't want to get canceled for calling someone a secretary. Anyway, we got on the phone and her first question was, well, how did we get introduced? So I told her who the person was. And she's like, well, this is so unusual because normally, I get introduced through an agent and then she started lecturing me about the process. And I looked at the time, we were 10 minutes into our phone call and we still haven't discussed anything. She was consumed with how the process is supposed to work. And at some point I just said, well, we're on the phone now. Maybe we should talk about the book a little bit. She did not care about the actual content. She cared more about the process. It was so my brain melted and oozed out of my ears during this conversation because I just couldn't believe someone that senior can function in this way. It was shocking to me. It was eye-opening and shocking. It told me everything I needed to know about this business. Actually, I had other interactions. I talked to a couple of agents and they too, I asked them basic questions about royalties, about rights or whatever. And some of them were like, no one's ever asked me that. I'm like, really? No one has ever asked you basic 101 royalty questions? I mean, things that any common sense person would ask. Anyway, it was crazy to me. They have no answers for marketing or technology, things that are highly relevant in this era. They weren't built for it. It wasn't in their DNA. They didn't have the people inside of their offices with those skills. It wasn't native to how they think as businesses. And that was to their detriment. They were already doomed just from the technological shift before Amazon or Jeff Bezos ever entered the picture. And digital was their extinction event, not Amazon. This transition to ebooks and user experience and new business models and the death of exclusivity and of gatekeepers who get to decide what gets published and what doesn't, and all these new marketing channels and tools, They were prepared for exactly 0% of this. And they just didn't have the vision for this market. They didn't have the skills. So to think that this corporate paraplegic can rush into battle and defeat, the monster that is Amazon is insanity to me. It's insanity. And to blame Amazon is a lazy way to think about this. Authors, they were just as complicit in this. When anyone can publish, and there are countless new modes of consumption, you got to raise your game. Just because you're an author and you wrote something, that doesn't entitle you to getting published, doesn't entitle you to getting your voice heard, doesn't entitle you to making money. It just doesn't. And unless you raise your game to the level that others are doing it or adopt some of these new technologies and marketing techniques, you're screwed. And you're dealing with a shrinking business and shrinking amount of consumption time and more people publishing because the tools are readily available. The competition level is through the roof. So you better be interesting. You better be more interesting than now. Instead of 100 people that are submitting book proposals, 100,000 people that could just type one up and self-publish. And finally, when they realized they were losing power, the publishers sued. They sued Amazon, and Amazon did some shady things, so I don't want to pretend like they didn't. But that's what uncreative incumbents do. They follow this well-worn path. It's the same path that Kodak took and Blockbuster took. And they're essentially, realizing that they're tumbling downward and they're just trying to grasp to, little rocks and things that could keep them from, hitting the bottom of the trench. And authors have to keep up. And maybe you're not an author anymore. Maybe you need to think of yourself as a creator of some kind and find ways of telling stories that people actually want. And same thing happened with bookstores. If you sell a commodity like a book, that's readily available online and also downloadable online with zero waiting time, you better raise your game. And, I tweeted this before COVID, but even now, this is going to come around. People are going to want to get out and participate in life again. They're not going to be locked up forever. So hosting book clubs, author readings, experiences for kids in reading, literary debates and competitions. And there's countless other ideas. I think I have more here. You could have cosplay costume competitions of your favorite literary characters. You could have movie versus book night where you screen a movie and then people debate which was better, the movie or the book. Monthly subscription book club. Literary debate championships with betting. Promote customers' work, source it from people and have readings of their work and feature them in your bookstore. I could do this all day. I can make hundreds of these ideas, hundreds. And to not adopt any of them and then point to Amazon and say, oh, they're taking our business, you are lazy. I'm sorry, you are lazy. And yes, sometimes it hits you hard, but that's when you have to get creative or shut down, regroup, and come back as something else, something that people actually want. And yes, you should fight back against predatory companies, but at some point, you also have to innovate. You just have to. Markets change, they always do. And there are ways to do it better. It's funny, we were talking about books. Barnes & Noble in 1995, when Windows came out, was a place people could go for tech support with Windows 95. And if you had Windows 95, you needed tech support. You needed more tech support than anyone in the history of the world has ever needed. More tech support than RoboCop, more tech support than the Terminator. I'm talking about insane amounts because that thing would crash every 5 seconds. But I actually think they were onto something. I still think there is a huge opportunity for a digital support center because technology is getting more pervasive and more complex. A lot of people are getting older. Some people are just not wired for it. And there's just this big unmet need for people to learn how to use everyday technology. So some sort of helpline, in-home servicing, and at some point after COVID, retail locations. I think that is still a great idea and a great opportunity. And you have Geek Squad that kind of did some of that, which was acquired acquired by Best Buy. You have the Apple Store and Genius Bar, but really they're in the business of selling you new stuff. They're in the business of you showing them a device. They look it over, try to turn it on, and go, oh no, you need a new one. That's the extent of it. So I do think there is room for an entity that cares, and Barnes & Noble, ironically, was onto it, but these are different times, I guess. This is a crazy situation. A young shopkeeper killed himself because he was banned from WeChat. Now, a lot of Americans don't understand the importance of WeChat in China. Basically, your whole life is tied to it. Not only is it how you communicate with your friends, your customers, international, vendors or whatever. It's the core of communication and commerce. Payments run through there, all kinds of stuff. And imagine losing access to it. And now your life is over. You can't connect to any of these people, and there's no customer service. It's like Google. Do you ever get locked out of Gmail? You better not, and you better have plan B. Because if you're relying on your Google account and you're relying on someone actually picking up the phone to help you recover it, good luck. Good luck. So I recommend if you're in any kind of business or send emails that are very important, I strongly recommend backing up your whole address book to a local file. And secondly, creating an account with a company where you pay, where you're the customer, and there's someone at the other end to pick up the phone. There's a company called Proton Mail, which is a secure, encrypted email company, and I think it's a good option for a lot of businesses. Anyway, I'm not getting paid by them. It's something I'm personally considering, and it's a lot of work to transfer emails, but it's important. People don't realize how dependent we're getting on all of these different platforms. Our connectivity to life, especially as things get more digital, to these companies who are oftentimes unaccountable to us because we're not customers, we're just users. I'm not a big fan of a lot of legislation only because it's so hard to predict what the unintended consequences might be. But we need to think about how to provide a minimum level of service so people don't get hosed, especially as our lives become tied to these technologies. And speaking of the future, a guy I follow, he's a startup guy, this guy Balaji, he really says, look, what is the successor to America or to any country? And what he thinks is, as we move on to virtual reality and using virtual currencies, that digital is a better metaphor for countries than physical countries. And that's where, people should agree on mutual rules and governance and crowdfund the things that are important in cities. And you can also get land with a bunch of like-minded people, and this entire process can be negotiated with a host government where you can live by your own rules of that community that you formed from those interests. I think that's interesting, and I think that's possible, but I also think there's going to be a lot of friction on that trajectory. And the three sources of friction are, one, incumbents aren't just going to let this happen. And I'm talking about countries, companies, and rich people, powerful people. There's going to be incredible pushback because they benefit from status quo. They benefit from the way things work. And can you imagine, you don't have to imagine it. The US government didn't allow Bitcoin to subvert our currency or just to run amok. They started regulating it. They started taxing it. They started tracking it because they know that control of the dollar is essential to the U.S. survival, really, because, if we were in the same boat other countries were in, we'd be screwed. Just our ability to print dollars and the fact that every other country does their business in dollars keeps us afloat as a country and almost allows us to run unlimited, not quite unlimited debt, but that's what we're doing when we're doing all these relief packages of trillions of dollars. And I think the other impediment is going to be this backlash against technological chaos and control. And it's some of the things that I've spoken about before, which is, we're giving up a lot of power to these corporations that are largely unaccountable to us. We don't know what they're doing with our data. We don't know how we will even log back in if we get locked out, or how we'll communicate with our customers or whatever if we get banned or canceled or whatever it is. So I think there is a backlash brewing. It's hard to know how strong it is because I think most people just go along, use their technology, and not make a stink about it. They have other problems. But also the third thing, which is the fundamental weakness of digital bonds. Digital bonds are weak. So are people going to move just because they have some things in common with a bunch of people who, want to start some, libertarian government that runs on Bitcoin, or some other people that are super into cosplay and they want to create a country inside of Montana? I don't think those connections run that deep, not the same way that traditional communities used to, or ones that are built on families and then extended clans that still exist in other places in India, although these things are weakening over time as well. A lot of people were worried that movie theaters are going to close because of COVID. I'm not that worried because the biggest movie chain ever, AMC, the biggest one in the US, is owned by a Chinese company. And there is no way in hell that the Chinese are going to let these guys go out of business. Never in a million years, because they're going to float them unlimited money, because they want to retain distribution leverage in Hollywood. Because remember, it's in China's interest to create propaganda. And Hollywood is in the business of creating propaganda for China. How does that happen? Because China is a growing market for consuming Hollywood movies and TV shows and other products, they've been gaining leverage to make sure China is shown in a positive light, that there are more Chinese actors and Chinese heroes in these stories. And on the surface, hey, nothing bad about that. Why shouldn't, Chinese people be well represented? But this is part of the game. This is part of the propaganda engine that goes on in communist countries. I know a lot about communism. In fact, I'm going to do a whole episode about this coming up. But you cannot underestimate the importance of perpetual bombardment of ideas, because it changes, especially subconsciously, changes how people think. And there's story after story of China exerting leverage. And AMC is a component of their leverage. Make no mistake about it. I was thinking, we have this pandemic, but why can't we have a pandemic? An infectious flare-up of puns that originated in some uncontroversial place like Punta Cana or Ipanema. Okay, that was pretty bad, right? All right. Listen, there's a lot of heavy stuff here, so I'm trying to break it up a little bit. Don't hold it against me. There's probably 3 or 4 iterations of this that I'm going to go through, but the thought is defend the flesh solely to ensure it can defend the mind. And I'm probably going to rephrase it 4 or 5 times from now. But what I've been thinking a lot about is, we're very consumed as a society with survival, as we should be. There's a lot of people who are struggling. There's a lot of people either, health-wise because of COVID or other conditions because they don't have health coverage. That's important to address right now. And there's also economic struggles that a lot of people are having, especially now with the lockdowns. And those are all important, very important. But we also can't take our eye off struggles of the mind. And part of it is, depression and all the things in our society that are causing it. But also longer term, the ideas that we subscribe to, the thoughts that permeate our environment, the toxicity of what we ingest mentally, and the stories that we tell ourselves about the future, how hopeful they are, and how we motivate ourselves to affect that future, and what are the realistic steps we can take in order to shape it. And we don't put nearly enough thought into that. And I think a lot of people mindlessly subscribe to off-the-shelf ideas and things that politicians say, or, some, articles that support a certain point of view. I think that's lazy and a disservice, because I think the trajectory we're on now is a very dangerous one. And I'm going to explore that more. But I think the mind, especially as it relates to long-term thinking, is badly damaged right now. And the things that we're ingesting, just like if you were feeding yourselves candy and M&Ms or whatever it is all the time, your body is breaking down, even though in the moment it feels good. So there's a philosopher, his name is Slavoj Žižek, or Žižek, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. He makes a lot of interesting arguments, but there's this one that I want to touch on today, which is the idea of political engagement. And, everyone talks about, you have to, be engaged, be involved with politics. His argument is, no, you don't. And you shouldn't. You shouldn't have to, because it's not healthy, and it shouldn't be how you spend your recreational time or just time in general. And he has a lot of great reasons for it. But the point I want to make is the reason people are saying it is that we're increasingly living in a low trust society. We don't trust our government. We don't trust people outside of our party, outside of our state. We don't trust media. We don't trust any institutions. We don't trust corporations. So trust in our society is plummeting. And in that moment, people do feel like they have to participate and right the ship. They don't think of it in those terms. In fact, they oftentimes latch on to what I think are very flimsy ideologies and try to, become activists around those. But what instead we need to do is change our presumptions of others. And I think it's healthy to question the aims of corporations or to set, the morality of society. But I also think it's important to approach individuals with the benefit of the doubt. You can't assume that the person at the other end of your, Twitter, diatribe is malicious. You can't assume that the friend that you're going to unfriend because of their political views doesn't have a reason for thinking what they do, or that their intentions are unpure. And I think we need to start presuming pure intentions, even if the conclusions that that person comes to are not the ones we came to, or we don't agree with them. And I think the trust in society gets rebuilt bottom up. And at some point, I'm hoping we'll be ready to provide the tracks on which media and government and corporations can run on and still represent our morality. But until we decide what our morality is, I don't know how we do that. And I don't think a lot of these pre-baked ideologies are going to do that for us. I really don't. I don't think socialism, I don't think a lot of the, what the Republicans and Trumpists and Democrats are saying, I don't think that does. I don't think, honestly, that happens until we start thinking critically and assuming good intentions in others, or at least not presuming bad intentions. Anyway, it's something I'll explore further in more detail, but it just got me thinking. So I wanted to check in on my projection. So on March 24th, I filmed a video about Kovid. I think it was called, I don't remember the exact name. I think it was called Forbidden Math. And in that episode, I predicted what the numbers of deaths will be in the US. So this is as of, I think, a couple of days ago. I think it was, September 1st or so. The number of deaths was 183,579. And that day we had added 534. So we're very close to my projection, which was 188,000 in the likely case. I also had a high case of 500,000. So also, there's a lot of questions of how we're counting. Some people say we're undercounting because the overall number of deaths for the year is much higher. And some people say we're overcounting because hospitals are getting paid based on COVID patients. And so anytime someone has other conditions that may also include COVID, they're chalking it up to COVID to get paid. Honestly, I don't want to get conspiratorial because I have no proof. What I would like, though, is I would like an audit. Because at some point when things start to settle down, I think the government should audit and hire independent auditors to see, did the tally make sense? Were hospitals tracking it correctly? Or was there undercounting? Who knows? I don't know. Maybe there are people who die in their homes that were not counting properly. I just have no idea. And I think a lot of the people who are throwing out certain opinions, whether, it's under or over, I don't think they know anything either. The reason I got close to this number is I used an extrapolation of what happened on that ship, the cruise ship, where people were infected. Because when you put people into confined quarters with a highly contagious disease, those numbers are very likely to be represented in the larger population once you adjust for ages and sickness levels and so on. So I think there's different reasons for different numbers, but I think I'm pretty close, and hopefully we're not going to see a huge escalation or a second wave or anything like that, because I think we're getting better at treating it, and I'm hopeful that there will be treatments, if not a vaccine. I'm actually not very optimistic about a vaccine, just based on how long it took us to get to 40% effectiveness for the flu vaccine. And I know there's way more effort being put into this, but I think it'll take time. So there will be other treatments, and I just saw that the WHO recommended a couple of steroids in the treatment. Hopefully they work. Anyway, wait and see. We see a tidal wave of small business closures. In fact, I saw a statistic that just from Yelp, they said that 75,000 of the businesses that are on Yelp have permanently shut down, and 15,000 of those were restaurants. Anyway, I think this is rough, and I also don't know how much propping up of these businesses makes sense. And it's not that I don't want to support them. I think it's really important to keep small businesses afloat. My concern is that so much is going to change about the composition of cities, where people live, where people move, and the patterns of behavior, that the businesses that existed before may not exist in the future. There just might not be a market for them. I think retailers are an obvious thing because there was barely a market for them before, and this was just the final straw. But I think in terms of dining out, in terms of, just a bunch of places like theme parks and, not that that's a small business, but anything that's experiential, laser tag place or something like that, I think people are going to think twice about doing some of those things. And I don't know that their market is going to come back in time for any kind of funding to last them. So I think we need to be a little bit more judicious, because I think we're in a very scary place economically, where our debt is now bigger than our GDP. And that's really scary, because we're getting older as a society, and unless we have some sort of growth engine that I'm not aware of, or some innovations coming that are going to be exclusively American, we're going to have a tough time repaying it and holding rates down enough to have money available for other things. Because remember, the bigger your debt, the bigger your interest payments, and the less money you have available for other things, for other investments. I talked about R&D earlier. Well, how are you going to fund all these things if you're paying off debt? And for now, we're able to keep rates low. There's no guarantee we're going to be able to do that in the future or forever. There's also a chance that we're overcorrecting. So you see these trends about working from home, suburbanization, killing retail, home entertainment, contact tracing, and invading people's privacy to do it, infection paranoia. All of these things might be huge overcorrections, very similar to the surveillance state after 9/11 and all the paranoia that followed it about Middle East and so on. And some of it justified, a lot of it not justified. It's okay if these overreactions are on an individual level or even on a corporate level, because there are ways that the market forces you to adjust very quickly. It forces you as a company, because if you're not making money based on a world of overreactions, you adjust in order to make the money. Individual, same thing. If you can't get a job remotely, you're going to move back to where the jobs are and maybe to a city. So we have the capacity to be much more fluid than government. What worries me is we're going to take a lot of these projections and these overcorrections and freeze them and calcify them in our laws, in which case they start to distort our economy and our behavior in the same way that, the surveillance state started distorting what we do at airports. So I think it's okay to underreact in some cases, especially for government, because individuals and corporations are much more flexible in reacting. And so even if government does get involved, I'd be very cautious about the degree of permanence to any of their actions. So one infection COVID has prevented is smiling. With masks, smiles aren't infectious anymore. Maybe even laughter is not infectious anymore. And then now people are talking about clear masks. That's only going to make smiling creepy. So I just think it's kind of funny how we're social creatures, but you introduce this huge impediment into how we socialize, and that itself is going to change our behaviors and society. I mean, when I was a single guy, picking up girls would be, a smile is a way to diffuse, distrust. Because if you're a big guy that towers over somebody and you're in a, bar or club or, who knows, some place where, someone might feel threatened, a smile is disarming. Carrying a Trader Joe's bag is disarming. Walking with your dog or your grandparents is disarming. So there are different ways you can disarm yourself as a single guy. But a big part of it is, the mask. And it's not just for guys, it's for women, it's for anyone, and I think it's an important part of how we signal whether someone is threatening or not. I know part of it is in the eyes, but I think that total package is important. And plus, how do you know someone's cute if they're wearing a mask? We're talking about serious concerns here. People could easily misread this. I am not left or right. In fact, I question everything. What worries me is now people are really consumed with the post office and postal voting. And I'm like, is this the time to experiment with a new mode of voting? Look, I think this election, if it's close, it's going to be contested no matter what. But we had an absentee ballot system, which was a low volume thing that trickled in over time and hopefully got counted. But it represented a very small percentage of total votes. And now, under this leadership, which is incompetent, under a pandemic, you want to experiment with a new mode of voting. I mean, look, people are going out to grocery stores. They're putting on a mask. They're, putting on gloves, and it's no different waiting in a high school, for a high school gym to let you in and safely vote, and then washing your hands and whatever else you need to do. And I know it's not easy for some people, and I know that people want to help. I think the best way to help is volunteer in one of these districts and make sure people know that it's safe to go in and help them set up processes for voting. That's the best you can do, because if you're going to rely on the post office, which has never handled this kind of volume, as the primary mode of voting for so many people, that's insanity to me. This is not the time for experiments. It just isn't. With all these arguments about the post office, I think the next Postmaster General should be a real general, because we know it's someone who served the country and has the country's interest at heart, and also knows how to run things. Now, of course, on occasion, we might have postal soldiers that shoot your dog on your lawn. But hey, listen, nothing's perfect. You can't have it all, America. And I think a Postmaster General is not a bad idea. And it's my idea, so of course I'm going to think that. So just a quick thing about cryptocurrency. In case you don't know what ICO is, you probably know what an IPO is, right? An IPO is when a company goes public and raises money from the public markets by selling stock. Well, ICOs were total bullshit, which is basically, a bunch of people made up Word documents and made a bunch of empty promises, made lists of fake advisors, and raised a bunch of money from people with no intention of actually even building whatever solution, this crypto solution that they wanted. So unless you're a scammer or a gambler or a sucker, you probably don't know what ICOs are. But there's a new thing that's happening now called DeFi, which is decentralized finance, which, all the crypto people are thinking that you don't need corporations or government or central authority to do transactions. I think for a lot of reasons I've already talked about, it's not going to be that easy. But now you have some of these DeFi companies paying 8% interest per day on your various coins, and there's a million of these coins. Look, this is another bubble. It's crazy. There's a lot of people who are going to milk this and make a bunch of money. I don't think it's going to end well for a lot of people. I just hope people are a little bit smarter. And I think there's a gambling mentality or get-rich-quick scheme that settles into a lot of people. They see all this activity, all this, the numbers going up in their account. And maybe it's fun. And if you treat it as fun and you put funny money in there or money you don't care about losing, that's fine. But I'm just concerned that we're entering this sort of gambling mentality, and digital offers this infinite canvas with which to create all kinds of things that have no meaning besides whatever meaning we assign to it. And crypto is exactly that, cryptocurrency. So I just hope people are a little bit smarter than the people who got hosed on ICOs. So David Blaine is flying using 18,000 balloons. And I'm like, is he a musician? Is he a magician? Because I remember David Copperfield, I don't know if it was the 80s or the 90s, he tried to make the Statue of Liberty disappear. Okay, look, he clearly did not, but it looked like he did, and it was an illusion, and it was ambitious, but I think it falls under the category of magic. If you're just reenacting the scene from Up where, the grandpa and the kid fly up with balloons, I don't think that counts as magic. That's just a trick, a publicity stunt. I don't know what it is. And, it's funny because we live in an era of real magic. I'd argue that the guy who launched his old car that he also invented into space on his own rocket is a far greater magician than someone who is now flying with balloons. Look, if you reach your 40s and you've had as much sex as David Blaine has had, flying around with balloons, why? Really, why? What's left to prove? What are you doing? Come up with a trick But come up with something impressive. I know that at some point you can put enough helium or whatever into balloons to fly in the air. Great. Who cares? So anyway, I think there's more magical and impressive stuff out there. Speaking of the gambling mentality, day trading has been revived with Robinhood, and I've been on this for a while. But we almost have to relearn this lesson again. And I understand a lot of people are home. They have time to play around their computers, and they probably would have been in casinos or in debt or getting beaten up by loan sharks, the usual stuff, good stuff. But now they're at home betting on stocks. And everyone looks like a genius when the market's going up, which it has been, largely because the Fed has printed a bunch of money. But it's almost like we have to relearn this lesson. This guy made a really great post. I'll put the link in the show notes. But he gave a bunch of reasons why it's stupid. Because first of all, most traders lose money. They just do. And most traders don't even know how to track their own returns. They have no idea how to calculate the total cost, or they have very selective memories, but they really don't understand it. Plus, it's a lousy job. Like, if you are even remotely successful or have the ability to be remotely successful and earn a good rate, dollar per hour or per day or annual salary, what are you doing? This is not a great use of time. And it takes away time from a job that might be important that you have. What if you're a doctor or a nurse or whatever? These are important jobs, and now you're spending time doing something stupid. And when things are going up, you can distinguish luck from skill. It's when things stop working, that's when you see whose methods work and whose don't. And also, if you find some technique that's working, it's going to stop working as soon as more people try it or something changes in the marketplace. So it's just completely unreliable and not a great investment or way to invest. I think allocating money smartly into the market, dollar cost averaging, as boring as it sounds, look it up if you don't know what I'm talking about, is still the best way to go. And even though the market's going to go through its ups and downs, the people who trade frequently oftentimes miss the best performing days because they didn't get back in the right time. So I think that there's no way to time it. And over time, if you have a healthy 10 plus year time horizon, you're not going to do much better than a well-structured portfolio that's diversified in index funds, in low-cost index funds. That's just it. Look it up. John Bogle, the creator of Vanguard, has a very simple theory, and there's a whole bunch of simple portfolios out there. There's easier ways to make money and focus on the things that really matter. MIT released an article about deepfakes. I did a whole episode on this, but deepfakes is basically a way of creating video that's so realistic that it looks like a person is saying something that they're not. They had one famously of Joe Rogan saying all kinds of crazy stuff, but it looks so realistic. They had ones of Obama and other people. You don't need that. If you take a video of a violent encounter, but you cut it at a certain point just to show one side's culpability, that's enough to cause a riot. That's enough to maybe overthrow a regime or to get people shot on the streets. You don't need deep fakes. We don't need deep fakes. We're already there. And people are combustible and stupid, which is the worst combination ever. Deep fakes, what they'll do, I think, is calcify our distrust in media and in each other. I think it's going to lead to a very cynical society. I just hope that this acts as a call to action for people to start thinking critically again. And I think it's too late for a lot of people, honestly. I think they're just far gone. I just hope that the next generation somehow recognizes the importance of thinking for themselves and not, just getting their ideas off the shelf from some people who have ulterior motives. McKinsey did a report that showed that the role of industry is so important that if you're a mediocre company in a great industry, that is going to drive way more profit than being a great company in a crappy industry. And I have seen this firsthand. A great example is these banks, like you've seen these local banks, the people they hire. I mean, they're one step above McDonald's cashier. But these banks somehow miraculously still make 20, 30% margins because it's just a great business. It's a great business. And then they eventually get bought up by somebody else, get rebranded. But supermarkets, very few supermarkets make more than 2 or 3% profit. It's a ridiculously low margin business. But, very rarely do you see a supermarket get anywhere near double digits. Anywhere, even the best ones, because look, stuff spoils. There's a lot of inventory to carry. It's just a very labor-intensive, capital-intensive kind of business. This applies to people choosing careers. If you're going to choose a career and you have the option, pick something that you're going to love doing, but also something that is in a profitable industry, where even if you're not the best performer, you can do well, or you have the skills that can get you to mediocrity, if not above it. That's it. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you for signing up for Patreon, and I will see you next time on the McFuture.